They called my online business a hobby, said my digital dreams were just another millennial fantasy. What they didn't understand was that while they mocked my laptop lifestyle, I was silently building an empire that would soon make headlines across the financial world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Holiday gatherings at the Winters estate in Greenwich had always been more competition than celebration. A carefully orchestrated showcase for investment banking promotions, hedge fund returns, and real estate portfolios. I'm Sophia Chen, 34. Years old now. 3 years ago, I abandoned my promising career at Blackstone Asset Management to launch my own digital marketing platform. Today, I was the family's cautionary tale. Did you hear about Sophia? The whispers followed me like shadows as I navigated through clusters of relatives in designer attire. Such potential, wasted on some internet scheme. Poor thing. I stood by the marble kitchen island, nursing a glass of champagne and watching. My cousin Ethan held court in the living room. He was describing his latest private equity acquisition, while my Uncle Richard nodded approvingly. Sophia? Aunt Victoria's voice cut through my thoughts. We haven't heard about your, what do you call it, internet business? How's that going, dear? The question dangled in the air, dripping with condescension. The room quieted as relatives turned to watch, anticipating my embarrassment with barely disguised schadenfreude. I checked my Apple Watch. 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time. In exactly 15 minutes, the Bloomberg terminal alerts would start buzzing across every financial institution in the country, including Ethan's firm and Uncle Richard's investment bank. It's going well, I said simply, taking another sip of champagne. Cousin Ethan couldn't resist jumping in. You know, Sophia, if you're looking for a real job again, Madison at my office is building a digital team. Entry-level positions, but you could work your way up. I smiled. That's thoughtful, Ethan. I'll keep it in mind. What Ethan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while they'd been climbing corporate ladders and chasing quarterly bonuses, I had been quietly building something revolutionary. Not just another app or dropshipping store, but an integrated AI-driven platform that was transforming how businesses connected with consumers across the digital landscape. How are those LinkedIn posts working out for you? My cousin Meredith asked with faux sweetness. I always see you posting about. What is it again? Digital solutions? I checked my watch again. 7:21 p.m. 3 years ago, I'd walked away from a six-figure salary and the golden handcuffs of traditional finance. My father, a third-generation investment banker, had called it career suicide. My mother had cried. Uncle Richard had pulled me aside at that year's Memorial Day barbecue and told me I was throwing away real opportunity for internet fantasies. Only my grandmother, with her quiet wisdom, had said something different. The world is changing, Sophia. Maybe you see something they don't. And I did see something. After 7 years analyzing market trends and consumer behavior patterns, at Blackstone, I had recognized a massive disconnect between how traditional companies approach digital marketing and how consumers actually made decisions online. There was a gap in the market so obvious to me, yet invisible to the institutions trapped in outdated paradigms. So I built Neurosense. Not just another marketing platform, but an adaptive ecosystem that could predict consumer behavior with unprecedented accuracy, adjusting brand messaging in real time across all digital touchpoints. I coded the core algorithm myself, working through nights and weekends in my small Brooklyn apartment. Sophia's doing her computer thing, my mother explained to a family friend, her voice carrying across the kitchen. She says it's a real business, but... She trailed off with a small shrug that spoke volumes. I smiled into my champagne glass. If they only knew that 3 hours ago, I had finalized the terms of Neurosense's acquisition, the largest ad tech purchase of the year. So, Uncle Richard said suddenly at my elbow. Still playing entrepreneur? You know, Preston and Winters always has a place for you. Real work, real clients, real money. He chuckled, glancing at his son Ethan. Not everyone's cut out for the financial world, but we could find you something in communications. Decent. Benefits, too. I checked my watch again. 7:28 p.m. I appreciate the offer, Uncle Richard, I said politely, but I'm actually quite happy with my current path. He patted my shoulder condescendingly. Well, the offer stands when reality sets in. We all go through our rebellious phases. Across the room, my cousin Meredith was showing off her new engagement ring, 3 carats, courtesy of her fiancé's recent promotion to managing director at Goldman Sachs. Aunt Victoria was detailing plans for her summer home renovation in Sabadell, the Hamptons. My father was comparing golf memberships with 2 other men in Brooks Brothers sweaters. The perfect tableau of traditional success. 7:29 p.m. I excused myself and walked to the large bay window overlooking the manicured garden. Any moment now. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What none of them understood was that success wasn't defined by corner offices or country club memberships anymore. The digital economy had created new pathways to wealth and influence that the old guard couldn't comprehend. While they measured success in square footage and job titles, I had built something borderless, something that scaled exponentially rather than incrementally. My phone vibrated in my hand. The first notification appeared. Breaking: tech giant Horizon acquires Neurasense for $2, $8 billion in industry-shaking deal. Then another: unknown founder becomes tech's newest billionaire in landmark acquisition. And finally, the alert I'd been waiting for. Bloomberg terminal alert: Neurasense acquisition creates newest member of billionaire index. I took a deep breath as phones began buzzing throughout the room. First Uncle Richard's, then Ethan's, then my father's. One by one, the financial professionals in the room were receiving the breaking news directly to their devices. The conversation died mid-sentence. Heads turned toward screens, then toward me, standing quietly by the window. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered, staring at his phone, then at me. Uncle Richard's face had lost its ruddy confidence. "Sophia? Is this—" "Yes," I said calmly. "That's my company." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's wine glass tilted dangerously in her hand. My father stood frozen, his Bloomberg app open to the headline bearing my name and photo. "Aunt?" Victoria found her voice first. But it says billions. That can't be right." I set my champagne glass down on a nearby table and walked to the center of the room. For 3 years, I'd endured their pitying glances and condescending advice. For 3 years, I'd listened to them call my business a hobby and my vision a fantasy. Neurasense's proprietary algorithm revolutionizes how brands connect with consumers, I explained, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. We've built an AI-driven platform that analyzes consumer behavior patterns across multiple digital touchpoints and predicts purchasing decisions with 97% accuracy. Our technology adjusts brand messaging in real time to maximize conversion rates. I watched understanding slowly dawn on their faces. The same relatives who had dismissed my computer thing were now grappling with the reality that I had just become the wealthiest person in the room, by several orders of magnitude. "But," Ethan stammered, "you never said anything. You let us think that I was failing?" I finished for him. "Yes, I did." "Why?" my father asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought about all the family dinners where my work had been dismissed, all the holiday gatherings where my chosen path had been treated as a punchline. I thought about the traditional metrics of success that had constrained their imaginations and limited their understanding of what was possible in the digital age. Because true innovation doesn't need validation, I said. It needs space to grow without judgment or interference. Uncle Richard had recovered enough to approach me, hand outstretched, his expression a complex mixture of shock and newfound respect. "Sophia, this is remarkable. We had no idea you were working on something of this scale." I accepted his handshake with a small smile. "That was by design, Uncle Richard." More phones buzzed. The financial news was spreading rapidly through networks and social media. Bloomberg TV was now running a segment on the acquisition, showing B-roll footage of our Brooklyn office alongside charts of Neurosense's growth trajectory. My cousin Meredith stared at me, her 3-carat engagement ring suddenly seeming less impressive. "You're actually a billionaire? From a website?" "From a revolutionary AI platform," I corrected gently. "And yes, according to the terms, finalized this morning." Aunt Victoria's social survival instincts kicked in. "Well, this calls for a proper celebration. Richard, open that special bottle of Cristal you've been saving." The mood in the room shifted palpably. Where there had been condescension, there was now deference. Where there had been pity, there was now awe. Family members who had barely acknowledged me earlier now clustered around, eager to hear details about my company, my vision, my success. I answered their questions patiently, explaining the fundamentals of Neurosense's technology in terms they could understand. But even as I spoke, I observed the subtle recalibration happening in their expressions, the growing realization that the traditional paths they had followed and enforced were no longer the only routes to success. My father approached me during a momentary lull, his face a complex mixture of pride and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "All this time," I thought. "That I was struggling?" I finished for him. "I know, Dad. And maybe part of me wanted to prove myself completely on my own terms, without the family name, without connections, without advantages." He nodded slowly, processing this. "I didn't understand what you were building." "Few people did," I acknowledged. "That's what made it valuable." As the evening continued, I noticed my grandmother watching from her favorite armchair in the corner. While others rushed to congratulate me, she simply smiled knowingly. I made my way over to her during a break in the attention. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked, sitting beside her. "Not the details, but that I was on to something." She patted my hand. "I knew you saw the world differently. That's always been valuable, even when others can't recognize it." She leaned closer. "And I knew you had your mother's stubbornness and your grandfather's vision. A powerful combination." I smiled, feeling a sense of genuine connection amid the sudden hollow validation from the rest of the family. My phone buzzed again. A message from Maya, my first employee and now Neurosense's chief technology officer. "It's official. Paperwork filed. Funds transferred. We did it, Sophia." Attached was a photo of our small team celebrating in the Brooklyn office, champagne bottles and pizza boxes scattered across desks. These were the people who had believed in the vision when it was just code and concepts, who had worked 18-hour days alongside me when we couldn't afford proper salaries, who had understood the potential of what we were building long before Bloomberg took notice. I excused myself from the family gathering and stepped onto the quiet terrace. The December air was crisp, the sky clear and star-filled. I called Maya. "We really did it," I said when she answered. I could hear cheering in the background. "Your family's minds blown yet?" she asked with a laugh. "Completely. Although they're all suddenly very interested in the tech industry." "I bet," Maya snorted. "You should see Twitter. We're trending." The overnight success that was actually 3 years of grinding work that nobody noticed. I smiled. Make sure everyone knows their shares are vested. Every person in that room helped build this. Already done. There are going to be a lot of millionaires on our team tomorrow morning. After we hung up, I leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out at the manicured gardens of the Winters estate. Inside, my family was already adapting their narrative, finding ways to claim they had always supported my entrepreneurial spirit. Uncle Richard was undoubtedly calculating how to leverage his connection to me for his next client meeting. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that somewhere across the country, other innovative thinkers were being told their digital dreams weren't real careers. They were being pressured to follow traditional paths and conventional wisdom. They were having their visions dismissed by people who couldn't see beyond their own limited experience. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow's headlines would give them the courage to continue anyway. I took a deep breath of the cold night air and smiled. The real value of today's news wasn't the acquisition price or the personal wealth. It was the validation of a different kind of success story, one that didn't follow the established rules or conform to traditional expectations. Inside, Aunt Victoria was calling for a toast. Uncle Richard was pouring champagne with newfound generosity. Cousin Ethan was undoubtedly recalibrating his condescension into networking opportunity. I rejoined them, accepting their congratulations with grace while mentally drafting an email to my team. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: integration with Horizon, scaling our technology, leveraging our newfound resources. The work was just beginning. To Sophia, Uncle Richard declared, raising his glass, who has made the family proud with her internet business. Glasses clinked, smiles beamed. The same relatives who had dismissed my career choice now celebrated it as if they'd supported me all along. I raised my glass in response, but my toast was different. To seeing possibilities others miss, I said, and to the courage to pursue them anyway. As the evening continued, I received a steady stream of messages from tech journalists, industry leaders, and investment firms, all suddenly eager to hear the story of Neurosense and its founder. Bloomberg wanted an exclusive. Forbes was planning a cover story. CNBC requested a live interview for tomorrow's Morning Bell. The narrative was already being shaped. Another overnight success story that ignored the years of work, doubt, and persistence that had preceded it. But I would correct that narrative. I would make sure people understood that innovation doesn't happen in flash moments of inspiration, but in thousands of hours of dedicated effort away from the spotlight. My father approached me again as the party was winding down. "I'm sorry I didn't understand," he said simply. "I was measuring success by the only metrics I knew." I nodded. "We all have our blind spots, Dad. Even me." "Your grandfather would have been proud," he added, emotion making his voice rough. "He always said the future belonged to those who could see it coming." As I prepared to leave, I overheard Ethan talking to his girlfriend. "Of course I always knew Sophia would succeed," he was saying. "I just didn't realize the scale. We've actually discussed her business model many times." I smiled to myself. Human nature was predictable, something Neurosense's algorithms had proven repeatedly. People reconstructed their memories to maintain their self-image, rewriting history to position themselves favorably in success stories they had once dismissed. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was that tomorrow, I would return to Brooklyn, to the converted warehouse space where Neurosense had grown from idea to billion-dollar reality. I would sit with my team and plan our next chapter. And we would continue building the future while others were still catching up to the present. As I drove away from the Winters estate, my phone buzzed with another notification. Bloomberg again. Neurosense acquisition signals new era in AI-driven marketing. CEO Sophia Chen becomes youngest self-made female billionaire in tech. I smiled. The headline wasn't important. The work was. And the work was just beginning. 3 years ago, I had chosen to leave the security of traditional finance to pursue a vision only I could see clearly. I had endured the doubt, the dismissal, the condescension of those who couldn't understand what I was building. I had worked while they mocked, created while they criticized, persisted while they predicted failure. And tonight, that persistence had been vindicated in the language the financial world respected most. Billions of dollars in Bloomberg headlines. But the real victory wasn't measured in acquisition prices or media coverage. It was in proving that success in the digital age didn't need to follow established pathways or conform to traditional expectations. It was in creating new possibilities for the next generation of innovators who might now find it easier to pursue their own unconventional visions. As Greenwich disappeared in my rearview mirror, I felt a sense of calm certainty. This wasn't the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new one, and this time I wouldn't be building in silence or obscurity. This time, the world was watching. And maybe, just maybe, someone else sitting through family criticism of their internet job would see tomorrow's headlines and think, that could be me someday. That possibility was worth more than all the billions in my newly established bank account. 6 months before the Bloomberg headlines, I sat in my Brooklyn apartment, staring at my laptop screen as rain pelted the windows. It was 3:47 a.m., and I had been coding for nearly 14 hours straight, fueled by cold coffee and unwavering determination. NeuroSense was at a critical juncture. Our algorithm worked brilliantly in controlled environments, but scaling it across multiple platforms was proving to be a monumental challenge. My phone rang, startling me. Only one person would call at this hour. "Please tell me you're not still working," Maya said when I answered. I rubbed my eyes. The recursive pattern recognition module keeps crashing when we push past 50,000 simultaneous data points. Maya sighed. "Sophia, we've been through this. You can't solve everything in one night." "I can try," I replied, though my body was screaming for rest. What most people never understand about building something revolutionary is the unglamorous reality behind it. While my family imagined me casually posting on social media from coffee shops, I was actually deconstructing and rebuilding our core architecture for the 5th time, working on a level of detail that would make most people's eyes glaze over. The journey to that Bloomberg headline hadn't started with venture capital or fancy offices. It had begun 3 years earlier in this same apartment, with nothing but a concept and unshakable conviction. After graduating from MIT with dual degrees in computer science and business analytics, I had followed the expected path. Prestigious internship at Goldman Sachs, then the coveted analyst position at Blackstone. My parents had been ecstatic. Their daughter was finally continuing the Chen family's financial legacy, albeit in a more modern context. For 7 years, I excelled in that world. My analyses of consumer behavior patterns helped guide investment decisions worth billions. I was on track for a directorship by 35, the golden trajectory. But something kept nagging at me. In my work analyzing retail and e-commerce trends, I noticed a pattern that nobody seemed to be addressing: the fundamental disconnect between how companies were marketing products and how consumers were actually making decisions in the digital age. Traditional marketing relied on demographic targeting, age, location, income brackets. But the data clearly showed that behavioral patterns and contextual signals were far more predictive of purchasing decisions. The problem was no existing platform could analyze and act on these signals in real time across multiple digital touchpoints. I brought my observations to Blackstone's innovation team. "This is the future of marketing," I explained, presenting my initial concept for what would eventually become NeuroSense. They nodded politely, then suggested I focus on my assigned portfolios. "Interesting hobby project," the senior director said, patting my shoulder. "But let's keep our eyes on the quarterly targets." That night, I began coding the first prototype of NeuroSense. 6 months later, I walked into my supervisor's office and resigned. My family's reaction had been predictable. "You're throwing away a perfect career for what exactly?" My father had demanded during a tense dinner at their Connecticut home. "An integrated platform that uses machine learning to predict consumer behavior and optimize marketing in real time," I explained. He exchanged glances with my mother. So, a website. It's an AI-driven ecosystem that will transform how brands connect with consumers. I tried again. Honey, my mother said gently, these internet things come and go. Remember Friendster, MySpace? But banking has existed for centuries. I had expected their reaction, but it still stung. What hurt more was realizing they couldn't see the future. I saw so clearly, a fundamental shift in how value was created in the digital economy. The family gatherings that followed my resignation became exercises in forced patience. Thanksgiving featured Uncle Richard explaining finance to me as if I hadn't spent years in the industry. Christmas brought Cousin Ethan's stories of year-end, bonuses and Meredith's not-so-subtle comments about finding your footing again. I stopped trying to explain Neurosense to them. Instead, I channeled that energy into building it. The first year was brutal. I burned through my savings renting a small office in Brooklyn and hiring 2 brilliant but undervalued engineers who believed in my vision. Maya Kim, a former Google developer who had grown frustrated with the company's bureaucracy, became our chief technology officer. Raj Patel, who had dropped out of Stanford's PhD program because he wanted to build things, rather than just theorize about them, joined as our lead data scientist. We worked 18-hour days, surviving on ramen and determination. When my lease expired, I moved to a cheaper apartment to extend our runway. I sold my designer clothes on consignment sites and traded my luxury car for public transportation. Every dollar went into Neurosense. At family gatherings, I downplayed these sacrifices. When Aunt Victoria asked about my smaller place, I simply said it was more convenient for work. When Ethan commented on my casual attire, I smiled and said tech had different standards. I never let them see the reality, that I was all in, on my vision, betting everything on what I knew others couldn't yet see. The breakthrough came 11 months after my resignation. After countless iterations, our algorithm successfully predicted consumer purchasing patterns across multiple platforms with 89% accuracy, far beyond what any existing technology could achieve. We tested it with 3 small e-commerce clients, and the results were staggering: 43% increase in conversion rates, 51% reduction in customer acquisition costs. That night, the 3 of us celebrated with cheap champagne in our tiny office. We did it, Maya said, raising her paper cup. Raj nodded, his eyes bright with exhaustion and triumph. This changes everything. And it did. Within 3 months, we had signed 10 paying clients. Within 6, we had a waiting list and had doubled our team. Our revenue growth curve was nearly vertical, exactly the kind of trajectory that catches attention in the tech world. The venture capital offers started coming in, first small funds, then increasingly prominent firms. I turned them all down. Are you insane? Raj asked after I declined a $10 million offer from a top-tier VC. We could scale much faster with that capital. And give away control of our vision, I replied. I've seen what happens when quarterly expectations drive innovation. We'd be pushed toward quick growth and a fast exit, rather than building something truly transformative. So we bootstrapped, reinvesting every dollar of profit into development and careful expansion. We moved to a larger office in the same Brooklyn building. We hired selectively, looking for brilliance and conviction rather than prestigious resumes. We grew organically, driven by client results rather than marketing hype. At that year's Thanksgiving gathering, my family's attitude had shifted from pity to cautious curiosity. News of our growing client list had reached them through industry channels. So, this internet business is actually generating revenue? Uncle Richard asked, clearly surprised. Yes, I said simply. We're profitable. Well, that's impressive for a startup, he admitted, though of course it's not quite the same scale as traditional finance. I just smiled. What Uncle Richard didn't know was that Neurosense was already processing more consumer behavior data daily than his entire bank handled in a month. Our revenue growth rate was outpacing every company in his investment portfolio. But I kept these details to myself. I wasn't building Neurasense to impress my family. I was building it to transform an industry. The real inflection point came 18 months after our launch. Adobe's marketing division approached us about an integration partnership. Microsoft followed. Then Salesforce. These industry giants recognized what my family couldn't, that Neurasense had developed a capability that would redefine digital marketing. As these partnerships expanded our reach, our data advantage grew exponentially. Each new client enriched our behavioral prediction models, creating a virtuous cycle that competitors couldn't match. By our second anniversary, Neurasense was processing over 3 billion consumer interactions daily, generating insights no other platform could provide. That's when the acquisition offers started. First came a mid-sized marketing tech company with a $180 million offer, then a larger CRM platform at $350 million. I declined them all, to my team's initial confusion. Sophia, these are life-changing amounts, Maya said after I turned down a $500 million offer. We were sitting on the roof of our office building, watching the sunset over the Manhattan skyline. That's exactly the problem, I explained. They're thinking of this as an exit, an end point, but we're just getting started. What we're building is worth multiples of these offers, but more importantly, it can change how the entire digital economy functions. Maya studied me for a moment. You really believe that, don't you? I know it, I said, and deep down, so do you. She nodded slowly. So what's the plan? We keep building. We refine our core technology. We expand our enterprise capabilities. And we wait for the right partner, not just the highest bidder, but someone who sees what we're really creating here and wants to scale it globally. 2 months later, Horizon Technologies entered the picture. Unlike previous suitors, they didn't lead with an offer. Instead, their CEO, Daniel Morrison, asked for a meeting to discuss our technology. I expected the usual corporate approach, a team of executives with polished slides and vague synergy talks. Instead, Daniel arrived alone, asked thoughtful questions about our architecture, and listened intently to our vision for the future of consumer intelligence. At the end of the meeting, he said something that resonated deeply. You're not building a feature or even a platform. You're creating a new paradigm for how businesses understand human behavior. We don't want to acquire that. We want to amplify it. Over the next 3 months, we engaged in detailed discussions about how a partnership might work. Unlike previous suitors, Horizon didn't want to absorb Neurasense into their existing products. They wanted to make it the intelligence layer for their entire ecosystem, while allowing us to maintain our team, culture, and development roadmap. And they were willing to value us accordingly. The night before we finalized terms, I sat alone in our Brooklyn office, reflecting on the journey. From the skepticism of my family to the grueling early days of bootstrapping, from the technical challenges that had seemed insurmountable to the team that had become like family, every step had led to this moment. My phone buzzed with a text from my grandmother. Whatever you decide tomorrow, I'm proud of you for walking your own path. Somehow, she always seemed to know when I was at a crossroads. I hadn't told her about the pending acquisition, hadn't told anyone in my family, but her intuition was uncanny. I called her. How did you know I had a big decision tomorrow? I asked when she answered. She chuckled. I raised your father, remember? I know that determined Chen's silence when I hear it. You've been quieter than usual at family gatherings. I smiled. We're finalizing an acquisition tomorrow. A big one. By we, I assume you mean the company you built from nothing while everyone told you it was a mistake. That's the one. Good, she said firmly. It's about time the world caught up to what you saw 3 years ago. Her faith, not just now, but throughout this journey, meant more than any Bloomberg headline ever could. The next morning, I gathered our team of now 48 employees. Many had been with us since the early days, working for below-market salaries because they believed in our vision. Others had joined along the way, drawn by the opportunity to build something revolutionary rather than just another incremental improvement. Today, we sign the final papers with Horizon, I announced. The terms value Neuroscience at $2.8 billion. The room erupted in cheers and gasps. Many of our early employees held equity that would now make them millionaires many times over. But more important than the valuation, I continued when the noise subsided, is what this partnership enables us to build next. Horizon sees what we're creating. They're not buying us to dismantle us or to absorb our technology into existing products. They're investing in our vision and giving us the resources to scale it globally. Maya, who had been with me since those first 18-hour days in our tiny office, had tears in her eyes. "We actually did it," she whispered. Raj, normally stoic, was beaming. From ramen dinners to billions, not bad for 3 years' work. But even in this moment of triumph, I found myself thinking of the journey rather than the destination. Of the countless technical problems we'd solved, the sleepless nights debugging complex algorithms, the moments of doubt when our server costs outpaced our revenue, the small victories that kept us going when the path forward seemed impossible. That afternoon, I signed the final acquisition documents in Horizon's Manhattan office. As the lawyers processed the paperwork, Daniel Morrison pulled me aside. "You know," he said quietly, "what impressed us most wasn't just the technology, though that's remarkable. It was how you built this. Bootstrapped, focused on substance over hype, driven by a clear vision rather than exit strategies. That's rare in this industry." I nodded, appreciating that he understood what had driven us. "We want you to keep that culture as you scale," he continued. "The independence, the focus on solving real problems rather than chasing trends. That's why we structured this deal the way we did. Under the terms, I would remain CEO of Neuroscience, which would operate as an independent subsidiary within Horizon. My team would stay intact. We would have access to Horizon's global resources and distribution channels, but maintain control over our technology and roadmap. And yes, I would become a billionaire on paper. The team members who had believed in our vision from the early days would become millionaires. The financial reality was staggering, but what mattered more was the validation of our approach and the platform it gave us to scale our impact. As the final documents were processed, I stepped onto the balcony of Horizon's office tower, looking out over the city. Somewhere in Greenwich, my family was preparing for their annual holiday gathering, unaware that their narrative about my internet job was about to be dramatically rewritten. My phone buzzed with an email from our PR team. The press release was finalized and would go live at 7:30 p.m., just as the Bloomberg terminals would be updating with the day's final financial news. The timing wasn't accidental. I wanted the announcement to reach the financial world first, to appear on the screens and devices of those who had been most skeptical of digital innovation's value, including my family. I thought about how I would handle their inevitable reaction. The sudden respect, the revisionist memories of always supporting me, the attempts to claim some connection to my success. Part of me felt a petty satisfaction at the thought of their shock, but a larger part simply felt vindicated in a deeper sense, not because I had proven them wrong, but because I had stayed true to a vision they couldn't see. As I prepared to head back to Brooklyn to change for the family gathering, Daniel joined me on the balcony. "Most founders are ecstatic on acquisition. He observed. You seem contemplative." I smiled. "I'm thinking about all the people who couldn't see what we were building, who defined success so narrowly that innovation didn't fit their metrics. And I'm wondering how many other brilliant ideas never get built because of that limited perspective." Daniel nodded. "That's why these moments matter beyond the financial headlines. They expand what people believe is possible. After today, maybe some other unconventional founder will have an easier time being taken seriously." That thought stayed with me as I left the Horizon offices and headed back to Brooklyn. In 3 hours, my family would see the headlines. In 3 hours, their perception of my work, and perhaps of digital innovation itself, would fundamentally change. But the true victory wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in having had the courage to see a different future and the persistence to build it, regardless of who understood. As I changed into an understated black dress for the family gathering, I made a decision. I wouldn't gloat. I wouldn't throw their dismissal back at them. Instead, I would use this moment to try to bridge the gap between their traditional understanding of success and the new realities of the digital economy. Because ultimately, this journey had never been about them. It had been about having the courage to follow a vision when the path wasn't clear to others, about persisting through doubt and difficulty because you believe in what you're building, about defining success on your own terms rather than accepting limitations imposed by convention. And perhaps most importantly, it had been about building something of genuine value, technology that would improve how businesses connected with real human needs and behaviors, something that would outlast headlines and acquisition prices, something that mattered. With that perspective clear in my mind, I headed to Greenwich, to the family gathering where everything would change. Not because of a Bloomberg headline or a billion-dollar valuation, but because I now had the platform to show them, and the world, what was possible when you refuse to accept artificial limitations on your vision. The real journey was just beginning. The morning after the Bloomberg headline broke, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. Hundreds of notifications had flooded in overnight. Congratulatory messages from industry peers, interview requests from major media outlets, and a surprising number of connection requests from relatives I barely knew existed. Fame in the digital age was immediate and overwhelming. I silenced my phone and padded to the kitchen of my Brooklyn apartment. Despite having the means to buy any penthouse in Manhattan, I had chosen to stay in the same place where Neuroscience was born. There was something grounding about these walls that had witnessed the struggle before the success. The coffee had just finished brewing when my intercom buzzed. The doorman's voice came through the speaker. "Ms. Chen, there are several news, crews outside requesting interviews, and a courier just delivered these." When I went downstairs, I found an assortment of gift baskets and flowers crowding the lobby. Tech CEOs, venture capitalists who had once declined to fund us, and even a few luxury brands eager to associate with the newest billionaire, all suddenly eager to demonstrate their connection to my success. One modest arrangement stood out: white orchids with a simple note. "The best success stories are written by those who didn't need anyone's permission to start the first chapter. Proud of you, Grandma." I smiled and took only her flowers back upstairs. As I sipped my coffee by the window, watching Brooklyn come alive below, my phone rang with a call from Maya. "Have you seen the coverage?" she asked without preamble. "It's everywhere. Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, CNBC. You're trending on every platform." "I've been avoiding my phone," I admitted. "How's the team taking it?" "They're over the moon. Raj has been fielding calls from former classmates who suddenly remember being great friends with him at Stanford. Priya's ex-boyfriend called to congratulate her on her stock options. Everyone's experiencing their own version of vindication." I laughed. The amazing power of a billion-dollar headline to jog people's memories. "Speaking of which," Maya continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "your father called the office 3 times this morning." I paused, coffee cup halfway to my lips. "What did he want?" "To reach you. He said your phone goes straight to voicemail. He also mentioned something about CNBC wanting to interview your family for a feature on your background and early influences." Of course they did. The narrative was already being constructed. The supportive family behind the tech visionary, the early influences that shaped my entrepreneurial journey. The reality of skepticism and dismissal didn't fit that heartwarming storyline. "What are you going to do?" Maya asked when I didn't respond. I set my cup down. "Tell the truth, just not all of it." My first interview was scheduled with Bloomberg TV that afternoon. As the makeup artist prepared me in the green room, the producer briefed me on the segment. "We'll start with the acquisition details, then move to your background. MIT, Blackstone, the decision to found Neuroscience. We've reached out to your father for some family perspective. He mentioned your family has a strong financial tradition that influenced your path." I kept my expression neutral. That's one perspective. The interview itself was a masterclass in narrative shaping. The host opened with the expected questions about the acquisition, which I answered with prepared points about Neuroscience's technology and vision. But when he pivoted to my background, the real performance began. "Your father tells us you come from a family with deep roots in financial services. How did that influence your entrepreneurial journey?" I smiled. "My family certainly gave me a first-hand view of traditional financial structures, which helped me identify opportunities for innovation in the digital economy. I saw both the strengths of established systems and the possibilities for transformation through technology." Not a lie, but certainly not the whole truth. "Was there a moment when you knew you had to leave Blackstone to pursue this vision?" I nodded. I was analyzing consumer behavior patterns across digital platforms and realized there was a fundamental disconnect between how companies approached marketing and how people actually made decisions online. The opportunity to bridge that gap was too compelling to ignore. Again, true. But omitting the dismissal of my ideas within Blackstone and my family's reaction to my resignation. "And your family supported this leap?" Here it was, the question that invited a comfortable fiction. I could easily play along with the narrative my father had already begun constructing, about a supportive family with financial acumen who nurtured my entrepreneurial spirit. The audience would love that story. The interviewer was clearly expecting it. Instead, I chose a different path. "I think my experience is actually more valuable if I'm candid about this," I said, shifting slightly in my chair. Like many founders, especially women in tech, I faced significant skepticism, including from those closest to me. My family had a very traditional view of success that didn't include leaving a prestigious position to launch a startup. The interviewer's eyebrows rose slightly. This wasn't in his prep notes. That skepticism was challenging, I continued, but ultimately valuable. It forced me to pressure test my vision, to be absolutely certain of what I was seeing in the market. And it taught me one of the most important lessons for any innovator. Sometimes you have to trust your own vision even when traditional wisdom suggests otherwise. "So they weren't supportive?" he asked, clearly recalibrating his line of questioning. "They were loving and concerned," I replied diplomatically. But real innovation often happens at the edges of conventional thinking. If everyone immediately understands and supports your vision, you might not be pushing boundaries far enough. By the time the interview ended, I had reframed the narrative. Not as a story of a supportive family propelling me to success, but as something more authentic and ultimately more valuable to other aspiring founders. A story about having the courage to pursue a vision that others couldn't yet see. As I left the studio, my phone rang. My father. "That was not what we discussed with the producer," he said when I answered. "I don't recall discussing anything with any producer, Dad." He sighed. "Sophia, there's no need to air family matters publicly. We've always supported your independence." "Dad," I said gently, "I didn't criticize you or anyone in our family. I simply acknowledged that innovation often faces skepticism, even from well-meaning people. That's not shameful. It's reality. Your Uncle Richard has already received calls from associates who watched the interview. It puts us in an awkward position." I paused on the sidewalk outside the studio, watching New Yorkers rush past, oblivious to the conversation. I understand that. But I have a responsibility to be truthful about the entrepreneurial journey, not just for my own integrity, but for others who might be facing similar skepticism right now. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. I suppose we did underestimate what you were building, he finally admitted, his voice quieter. Everyone did, I said. That was part of our advantage. That evening, my inbox contained a different kind of message. Hundreds of emails from founders, particularly women and people of color in tech, thanking me for acknowledging the skepticism they too had faced, for not perpetuating the myth that every successful founder had a cheering section from day one. One message in particular caught my attention, from a young woman named Zara who had recently left a consulting position to launch a climate tech startup. My family thinks I'm having a quarter-life crisis. My former colleagues treat my startup like a hobby. Today, I watched you tell the truth about your journey on Bloomberg, and for the first time, I felt like maybe the doubt around me isn't evidence that I'm making a mistake. Maybe it's just part of seeing something others can't see yet. Thank you for that honesty. I read her message twice, then clicked reply. The next morning, a car picked me up for my appearance on CNBC's Squawk Box. As we drove through Manhattan, the driver made small talk. Big day yesterday, huh? Saw you on Bloomberg. My daughter watched it too. She's in college studying computer science. Said it was cool to see someone who looks like her making it big in tech. I smiled. What's your daughter's name? Janelle. She's at Rutgers, first in our family to go to college. Tell Janelle I said to trust her vision, especially when others don't get it yet. He beamed in the rearview mirror. Will do. The CNBC interview followed a similar pattern to Bloomberg. Initial questions about the acquisition and technology, followed by attempts to construct a neat narrative about my background and journey. Again, I gently redirected, emphasizing the realities of innovation rather than conforming to the expected success story template. By the third interview, a pattern was emerging. Business media wanted to frame my success in familiar terms: elite education, family connections, traditional career path briefly detoured into entrepreneurship, then triumphant return to establishment, success via acquisition. It was a comfortable narrative that reinforced existing beliefs about how success happens. But it wasn't my story. And it wasn't the story that would help the next generation of founders who didn't fit the traditional mold. Between interviews, I received a text from Daniel Morrison, Horizon's CEO. Watching your media tour. Appreciate your authenticity. This is exactly why we wanted to partner with you and your team. By mid-afternoon, I had completed 6 interviews and was exhausted. I canceled the remaining appointments and instead did something impulsive. I took a subway to Columbia University, where I had been invited to speak to a women in computer science group months earlier, long before the acquisition news. The student organizer, Prisha, was shocked when I actually showed up. We assumed you'd cancel with everything happening, she admitted, as she led me to a small lecture hall where about 40 students waited. We would have understood. This matters. More than another cable news segment, I told her. These are the conversations I want to prioritize. For the next 2 hours, I spoke candidly with these young women about the realities of founding a tech company, especially as someone who didn't fit the typical founder stereotype. I told them about the technical challenges we'd overcome, the nights debugging code until sunrise, the difficult decisions about bootstrapping versus taking venture capital. And yes, I told them about the skepticism, from former colleagues, from investors, from family members who couldn't understand why anyone would leave a prestigious position to pursue an unproven idea. The most dangerous limitation is the one you internalize, I told them. When you start believing that your vision is less valid because others don't understand it yet. After the talk, a line of students waited to speak with me. One young woman, hands fidgeting nervously, Finally, reach the front. My parents want me to take a safe job at a big tech company, she said, but I have this idea for an algorithm that could help identify early-stage kidney disease through urine analysis. No one thinks it's viable as a business. I don't know if I should pursue it or listen to everyone telling me to take the safe route. I considered her for a moment. What's your name? Lynn, she replied. Lynn, here's what I wish someone had told me earlier. Experts are experts in what already exists, not in what could exist. They're looking backward while founders have to look forward. That doesn't mean ignore all advice. Gather knowledge, test your assumptions rigorously, but don't let someone else's limited imagination define what's possible for you. Her eyes widened slightly. But how do you know when it's a good idea that others just don't get yet, versus actually a bad idea? I smiled. That's the million-dollar question, or in my case, the billion-dollar question. You test it, not with opinions, but with data. Build the simplest version that can prove your core thesis. Put it in front of real users. The market will tell you what no advisor can. As I left Columbia and headed back to Brooklyn, I felt more energized than after any of the high-profile interviews. These were the conversations that mattered, the ones that might help the next generation of innovators push past the limitations others placed on them. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Emergency at the office. Need you here ASAP. 30 minutes later, I walked into organized chaos at Neurosens headquarters. The engineering team was clustered around monitors, faces tense. Maya met me at the door. We're experiencing unprecedented system load, she explained, leading me to the main engineering station. After the acquisition news, usage of our platform spiked 400%. Every client is pushing our API to its limits, testing what their new capabilities might be. We're approaching processing thresholds we haven't load tested for. Raj looked up from his monitor. The good news is the core algorithm is holding stable. The scaling issues are in the distribution layer. I dropped my bag and pulled up a chair. Show me. For the next 6 hours, I worked alongside my team, diving back into the code that had been my obsession for 3 years. We identified bottlenecks, restructured data flows, and optimized processing paths. As midnight approached, we had stabilized the system and implemented a more robust scaling architecture. I have interviews scheduled all day tomorrow, I said, rubbing my eyes as our final tests came back positive. Raj laughed. The billionaire CEO still debugging at midnight. That's why we followed you into this crazy venture. I looked around. At my team, brilliant, dedicated people who had taken a chance on a vision when it was nothing but concept and conviction. Some had left prestigious positions. Others had turned down higher-paying offers. All had worked countless late nights. Like this one, solving problems that sometimes seemed insurmountable. This is the part they don't see, I said, gesturing to the room, the empty coffee cups, the whiteboards filled with diagrams and code snippets. This is the reality behind the overnight success story. Maya nodded. And it's the part that matters most. The next morning, despite my lack of sleep, I had a scheduled appearance on a popular business podcast. The host, known for his insightful interviews with entrepreneurs, began with a different approach than the television programs. Most coverage of Neurosens has focused on the acquisition price and your new status as one of tech's youngest female billionaires, he said. But I'm more interested in the work itself. What problem were you solving that was valuable enough to command a $2.8 billion valuation? Finally, a question about the substance rather than the narrative. For the next hour, we discussed the technical innovations behind Neurosens, the behavioral patterns our algorithms had identified, and the fundamental shift in how digital marketing could serve human needs rather than just capturing attention. You've been candid in other interviews about facing skepticism, he noted toward the end. Looking back now, Do you think that skepticism served a purpose in your journey? I considered the question carefully. Yes, but not in the way most people might think. It wasn't about proving the doubters wrong or using negativity as motivation. The value was in learning to differentiate between useful feedback and limitations that existed only in others' perspectives. Can you elaborate on that? When you're creating something new, feedback comes in many forms. Some skepticism is based on legitimate concerns that you need to address. But some is simply the result of others projecting their own limitations onto your vision. Learning to tell the difference. That's the real skill. Taking the useful feedback while not internalizing the limitations. As the interview concluded, he asked one final question. What would you tell someone facing that wall of skepticism right now, wondering if they should persist or listen to the doubters? I thought of Lynn at Columbia, of Zara's email, of the thousands of founders working in obscurity on visions others couldn't yet see. I would tell them that innovation, by definition, challenges existing paradigms. If everyone immediately understands and supports what you're building, you might be making something valuable, but you're probably not creating something transformative. The most significant breakthroughs often look like mistakes or delusions to conventional wisdom, until they don't. I paused, then continued with the thought that had been crystallizing throughout this whirlwind media tour. But I'd also tell them that the goal isn't to prove others wrong. It's to bring something valuable into the world that wouldn't exist otherwise. Keep your focus there, on the creation, not the validation. The validation will come if you're right, but it's not the purpose. The purpose is the work itself, and the impact it can have. As I left the podcast studio and stepped into the bright New York morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. Bloomberg again, but not about Neuroscience this time. The headline read, Tech Titan invests $50 million in kidney disease detection startup founded by Columbia student. Below was a photo of Lynn, the student I'd spoken with just yesterday, standing beside one of the most successful healthcare investors in the country. The caption noted that her algorithm for early kidney disease detection had shown promising results in initial testing, challenging conventional diagnostic approaches. I smiled and took a screenshot. Sometimes, the most important impact happens away from the headlines, in the quiet conversations that help someone trust their vision despite the doubts surrounding them. And that, far more than any acquisition price or Bloomberg headline, was the success that mattered most. 1 year after the acquisition headlines, I stood on the stage at TechCrunch Disrupt, looking out at a sea of faces, founders, investors, journalists, and students all waiting for insights on building a billion-dollar company. The spotlight was warm on my face, the audience a blur beyond the first few rows. Success has many authors, I began, departing from my planned remarks, especially after the fact. But innovation begins in isolation, in that moment when you see a possibility that others don't, and you decide to pursue it despite the absence of validation. The journey since the Bloomberg headline had been a whirlwind of contrasts. Neuroscience had grown from 48 employees to over 300. Our Brooklyn headquarters had expanded to 3 floors, with additional offices in Singapore, London, and Berlin. Our technology now powered consumer interactions for 7 of the 10 largest brands in the world. But the most significant evolution had been more subtle. The shift in how I understood my role in the larger ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship. I've been asked to share the secrets of Neuroscience's success today, I continued. But I want to challenge the premise of that request, because framing breakthrough innovation as a replicable formula misunderstands how transformation actually happens. The audience shifted slightly, not expecting this deviation from the usual founder success story. The truth is, the next billion-dollar company won't look like Neuroscience. The next breakthrough won't follow our playbook. It will come from someone seeing a possibility that the rest of us, including me, are currently blind to. I stepped away from the podium and moved to the center of the stage. So instead of telling you how to replicate our path, I want to talk about how to find your own, how to identify and pursue the opportunities that only you can see. For the next 30 minutes, I shared the deeper truths of innovation that had become clear to me over the past year. Not the sanitized success story that business media preferred, but the messy, non-linear reality of creating something new. I told them about the psychological weight of pursuing a vision others dismissed, how doubt creeps in during the small hours of the morning, how isolation tests your conviction, how the constant pressure to conform to established patterns wears on your resolve. I talked about the false choices presented to innovators, the pressure to follow either the established wisdom of incumbents or the trendy patterns of the startup ecosystem, when true breakthroughs often require rejecting both. And I shared what I had learned about identifying genuine insight amidst the noise of opinions, feedback, and conventional wisdom. The most valuable question isn't, "Will this work?" I told them. It's, "What do I see that others don't?" And, "Why might I be right when conventional wisdom is wrong?" As I concluded, the room was silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Afterward, the usual crowd of networkers formed at the edge of the stage, but one woman waited patiently, behind them, clutching a notebook. When the crowd finally dispersed, she approached. "Ms. Chen, I'm Dr. Yara Nasser from the Center for Innovation Psychology. I've been studying the psychological patterns of breakthrough innovators, and your talk just articulated something we've observed but struggled to define." She opened her notebook, revealing pages of notes. "You described a cognitive stance that differentiates transformative innovators. This ability to hold conviction in a vision despite social pressure, without descending into delusional thinking. Would you be willing to participate in our research?" That conversation led to one of the most meaningful projects of the post-acquisition year, a collaboration with psychologists, neuroscientists, and innovation researchers to better understand the cognitive and emotional dimensions of breakthrough innovation. While the business world remained fixated on the mechanics of Neurosense's success, our technical architecture, our growth metrics, our monetization strategy, I became increasingly interested in the human elements that preceded all of those, the ability to see different possibilities, the courage to pursue them without validation, and the resilience to persist through the inevitable challenges. 6 months after TechCrunch Disrupt, we published our initial findings in the Harvard Business Review. The article, titled "The Cognitive Foundations of Breakthrough Innovation," challenged many established beliefs about entrepreneurship and creative thinking. The capacity for breakthrough innovation isn't primarily about intelligence, education, or even domain expertise, we wrote. It's about a particular relationship with uncertainty and social consensus, the ability to identify when consensus views might be wrong, and to navigate the discomfort of pursuing alternative possibilities without external validation. The research struck a chord far beyond the business community. We received responses from artists, scientists, educators, and social entrepreneurs, all recognizing the same patterns in their own fields. Meanwhile, Neurosense continued to evolve under Horizon's umbrella. With access to greater resources and distribution channels, we accelerated our development roadmap and expanded into new markets. Our core algorithm grew more sophisticated as it processed trillions of consumer interactions, identifying behavioral patterns that traditional marketing theory had never recognized. Throughout this period of intense growth and attention, I maintained my regular meetings with aspiring founders, particularly those from backgrounds underrepresented in tech. These conversations, often held over coffee in our Brooklyn office or during walks along the East River, became a grounding ritual amidst the chaotic demands of scaling a global company. I met Zara, the climate tech founder who had emailed me after my Bloomberg interview. Her startup, which used AI to optimize energy consumption in commercial buildings, had secured seed funding and early pilot customers. Everyone told me the sales cycle for commercial real estate would be too long, That building managers wouldn't adopt new technology, she told me as we walked through Brooklyn Bridge Park. But I saw something they didn't. That rising energy, costs and new regulations were creating urgency that didn't exist before. I nodded, recognizing the pattern. You identified a changing contextual factor that experts were overlooking because they were extrapolating from past patterns. Exactly, she exclaimed. And now those same experts are calling me lucky for timing the market correctly. I laughed. Get used to that. Success has a way of being reframed as inevitability in retrospect, even by the same people who called it impossible in prospect. These conversations with emerging innovators revealed a common thread: the challenge of maintaining authentic vision while navigating a world eager to impose its limitations. Some struggled with investors trying to push them toward familiar business models. Others faced pressure from advisors to conform to established patterns. Still others battled the internal voice of doubt that echoed external skepticism. In response to these recurring themes, Maya and I developed the Neuroscience Innovation Fellowship, a program that provided funding, mentorship, and community for founders pursuing visions that challenged conventional wisdom. Unlike traditional incubators focused on quick market validation, our fellowship emphasized depth of thinking, rigor of analysis, and courage of conviction. We're not looking for the next Neuroscience, I explained at the fellowship launch. We're looking for founders who see possibilities that we don't, who are working at the edges where breakthrough innovation happens. Our first cohort included founders working on problems ranging from regenerative agriculture to distributed computing to mental health interventions. What united them wasn't a particular industry or technology, but a cognitive approach, the ability to identify gaps between established consensus and emerging reality. As the fellowship gained prominence, I received an unexpected call from Uncle Richard. Sophia, he began, his voice carrying the forced casualness that always preceded a request. I have a situation I'd like your perspective on. I smiled to myself, remembering the countless family gatherings where he had dismissed my internet job with barely concealed condescension. What can I help with, Uncle Richard? It's my son, your cousin Ethan. He's struggling with his career direction. The private equity landscape is changing, and frankly, he's not adapting well. I thought perhaps you might speak with him, given your experience with career transitions and new technologies. The irony wasn't lost on me, being asked to advise the same cousin who had once offered me an entry-level position as a favor. I'd be happy to speak with Ethan, I said, choosing generosity over vindication. Have him reach out directly. A week later, Ethan and I met at a quiet cafe in Greenwich Village. Gone was the cocky demeanor of family gatherings past, replaced by a nervous energy as he fidgeted with his coffee cup. Thanks for meeting me, he began awkwardly. I know. We haven't always. I probably wasn't. It's fine, Ethan, I said, saving him from the painful apology. What's going on with your work situation? He exhaled heavily. Everything's changing. The whole industry. Algorithms are replacing analyst functions. Deal flow is being transformed. By data science, the skills that made me successful 5 years ago aren't enough anymore. I nodded. Creative destruction. Schumpeter called it the essential fact about capitalism, the process of constantly replacing established structures with new ones. Exactly, he exclaimed, seemingly relieved that I understood. And I'm on the wrong side of it right now. Dad suggested I talk to you because, well, you saw something changing before others did. I studied my cousin, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. Behind the privilege and arrogance was something more universal, the fear of irrelevance, of being left behind by change you didn't anticipate. The first step, I said gently, is recognizing that your existing mental models might be obsolete. That's actually the hardest part for most people, so you're already ahead by acknowledging it. For the next 2 hours, I shared with Ethan the principles of adaptive thinking that had guided Neurosense's development: how to identify emerging patterns, how to distinguish signal from noise in changing environments, how to develop hypotheses, and test them with empirical data rather than relying on conventional wisdom. As our conversation concluded, Ethan seemed lighter, energized by new possibilities. "I never thought I'd be coming to my internet job cousin for career advice," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Life is full of plot twists," I replied. "The question is whether we're open to revising our narratives when new evidence appears." That conversation with Ethan crystallized something I had been reflecting on throughout the post-acquisition year: that the most significant impact of our success might not be the technology itself, but the permission it gave others to challenge limitations, to pursue visions that didn't conform to established patterns. This insight led to my most ambitious post-acquisition project: the establishment of the Emergent Possibilities Institute, an independent research organization dedicated to understanding and fostering breakthrough innovation across disciplines. The institute brought together cognitive scientists, entrepreneurs, artists, philosophers, and technologists to explore the fundamental patterns of transformative thinking. Rather than focusing on the mechanics of startup creation or the tactics of business growth, we examined the deeper cognitive and social processes that enable humans to envision and create previously unimagined possibilities. At the Institute's launch event, held in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, I articulated the vision that had been forming throughout the year since the Bloomberg headlines. The greatest limitation on human progress isn't technological, it's imaginative, I told the gathered audience of thinkers and creators. We are constrained not by what's possible, but by what we believe is possible. I shared how Neurosense had begun not with a technological breakthrough, but with a shift in perspective, seeing patterns in consumer behavior that existing frameworks overlooked. The technology had followed that initial insight, not preceded it. Breakthrough innovation begins with perception, with seeing differently, I continued. And perception is influenced by social context, by institutional structures, by cultural narratives about what's valuable or possible. The Institute's mission, I explained, was to develop methods and environments that expanded the boundaries of perceived possibility, that helped individuals and organizations see beyond the limitations imposed by conventional thinking. As I concluded my remarks, a familiar figure approached from the back of the room. My grandmother, supported by a cane but still radiating the quiet strength I had always admired. "Not bad for an internet job," she said with a mischievous smile, embracing me. "You were the only one who saw the possibility," I reminded her. She shook her head. "No, my dear, I didn't see the possibility. I saw you, and I knew better than to impose limitations on what you might create." That night, after the launch event concluded, I returned to my Brooklyn apartment, still the same space where Neurosense had begun, though I had finally renovated it. Sitting by the window overlooking the city lights, I reflected on the journey from skepticism to Bloomberg headline to the deeper purpose that had emerged in the year since. Success had amplified my voice, opened doors, created new possibilities. But its greatest value wasn't measured in acquisition prices or media attention. It was in the permission it gave others to trust their own vision when conventional wisdom said they were wrong. In the example it provided of persisting through doubt and dismissal, in the proof it offered that seeing differently could create tremendous value. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Just saw the Institute launch coverage. From hidden code to cognitive science in 4 years. What's next?" I smiled. The question wasn't about Neurosense or the acquisition or the Institute. It was about the fundamental orientation toward possibility that had guided every step of my journey. What's next? Always. What's next? The answer wasn't a specific project or goal, but a commitment to the continuous expansion of perceived possibility, both for myself and for others. to keep identifying limitations in current thinking, to keep imagining alternatives, to keep creating what others couldn't yet see. I texted back, "Something we can't imagine yet. That's the whole point." The next morning, I had a scheduled interview with Forbes for their annual Innovators issue. The journalist, a thoughtful woman who had covered the tech industry for decades, asked a question I hadn't anticipated. "A year after the acquisition that made you a billionaire, you're focusing on cognitive science and innovation theory rather than another technology venture. Many successful founders immediately start new companies. Why this direction instead?" I considered the question carefully. Because I realized that Neurosense wasn't ultimately about the technology or even the market opportunity. It was about seeing a possibility that existing frameworks missed, and that capacity to see beyond current limitations is the meta skill that drives all breakthrough innovation. I continued, articulating the understanding that had been forming throughout the past year. We tend to focus on the outputs of innovation, the companies, products, technologies. But the source is this uniquely human capacity to imagine what doesn't yet exist, to question established consensus, to persist without external validation. If we can better understand and develop that capacity, we can accelerate breakthrough innovation across all domains. The journalist nodded thoughtfully. "So in a sense, you're trying to democratize the cognitive patterns that enabled your success." Exactly. Innovation isn't magic or genius. It's a way of perceiving and thinking that can be understood and cultivated. The more people who develop that capacity, the more breakthrough solutions we'll see to our most significant challenges. As the interview concluded, she asked one final question. "What would you tell someone reading this who has a vision others dismiss? Who sees a possibility that current experts or authorities say isn't valid?" I thought of all the emails I'd received over the past year from founders facing skepticism, from innovators whose ideas challenged established thinking, from creators working in isolation on visions only they could see clearly. I would tell them that external validation is the result of breakthrough innovation, not a prerequisite for it. That the most significant contributions often begin as perspectives that experts dismiss or overlook, and that their capacity to see differently isn't a liability to be corrected, but potentially their greatest asset. I paused, then continued with the insight that had become clearest to me since the Bloomberg headline had transformed how the EEI world viewed my work. Most importantly, I would tell them that the true measure of their vision isn't whether others currently understand it, but whether it corresponds to an emerging reality that others haven't yet recognized. Innovation isn't about being contrarian for its own sake. It's about perceiving patterns and possibilities that existing frameworks miss. After the interview, I walked through Brooklyn, enjoying the anonymity of being just another person on the crowded sidewalks. Despite the media attention, most people wouldn't recognize me on the street, a fact I appreciated as I stopped for coffee at a small cafe near Prospect Park. As I waited for my order, I overheard two young women at a nearby table, laptops, open, engaged in intense conversation. "Everyone says the market's saturated," one was saying, "that there's no room for another approach, but they're all solving the wrong problem." "I know," her companion replied. "They don't see what we see." I smiled to myself, hearing in their determination echoes of countless late nights with Maya and Raj, insisting to each other that our vision was valid despite the skepticism surrounding us. The particulars of their innovation didn't matter. What mattered was the cognitive stance, the willingness to trust their perception when it diverged from consensus. As I collected my coffee and headed toward the park, I felt a deep sense of purpose and clarity. The Bloomberg headline had been a milestone, not a destination. The acquisition had been a validation, not a conclusion. The true journey was ongoing, expanding the boundaries of what we collectively perceive as possible, creating pathways for breakthrough thinking that challenges limitations and creates new value. My phone buzzed with a notification, A message from Lynn, the Columbia student whose kidney disease detection startup had secured major funding. "We just completed our first clinical trial," she wrote. 93% accuracy in detecting early-stage kidney disease 2 years earlier than conventional methods. The medical establishment is finally paying attention. I smiled and typed a response. They always do, eventually. The challenge is believing in what you see before they do. As I walked through Prospect Park, surrounded by New Yorkers enjoying the spring afternoon, I reflected on the circular nature of innovation. My story had helped inspire Lynn. Her breakthrough would help countless patients. Those patients would live longer, healthier lives that might produce new innovations. Each breakthrough expanding the boundaries of what seems possible, creating space for the next visionary to push those boundaries further still. And that, far more than any Bloomberg headline or billion-dollar valuation, was the true reward of seeing differently, of having the courage to pursue a vision before others understand its value. Not just the immediate impact of your own creation, but the permission it gives others to trust their unique perspective, to question limitations, to imagine and build what doesn't yet exist but someday will. The greatest innovation isn't any single product or company or technology. It's the expanding universe of perceived possibility that each breakthrough creates, the continuous revelation that what we collectively believe is possible represents only a fraction of what actually is. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Manhattan penthouse, illuminating the space I had finally allowed myself to purchase after 2 years of living in my Brooklyn apartment post-acquisition. The view of Central Park provided a moment of tranquility before the day's events, a rare commodity in my life these days. 5 years had passed since the Bloomberg headline that transformed how the world perceived my work. Neuroscience had evolved from a revolutionary marketing platform into the intelligence layer powering consumer interactions across the digital economy. Our technology now processed over 40% of all e-commerce transactions globally, using behavioral prediction to create more intuitive, efficient experiences. But today wasn't about neuroscience or acquisition anniversaries or business milestones. Today was about something more fundamental, the ripple effects that spread when one person's breakthrough inspires others to challenge limitations. I was preparing to deliver the commencement address at MIT, my alma mater. As I reviewed my notes, my phone buzzed with a text from Zara, whose climate tech company had recently gone public in one of the most successful IPOs of the year. "Nervous about the speech?" she asked. I smiled. Terrified, much harder than pitching to VCs. "Just tell them what you told me 5 years ago in Brooklyn Bridge Park. That changed everything for me." What I had told Zara, and countless other founders since, was simple yet profound. That the most significant breakthroughs begin with the courage to trust your perception when it diverges from consensus, to pursue a vision that others don't yet understand or value. That message had become the cornerstone of my work over the past 5 years, evolving from informal mentoring into systematic efforts to foster breakthrough innovation across disciplines. The Emergent Possibilities Institute had grown into a global research organization with centers in New York, Singapore, Berlin, and Nairobi, studying the cognitive and cultural dimensions of transformative innovation. Our work had influenced how universities taught entrepreneurship, how corporations approached innovation, and how investors evaluated early-stage ideas. Rather than focusing exclusively on market validation and traction metrics, we had developed frameworks that identified genuine insight and breakthrough potential even when conventional metrics couldn't capture it. As I gathered my things and headed to the door, I paused to look at the wall of my office, covered not with awards or press clippings, but with letters and photos from founders whose journeys had intersected with mine. Lynn, whose kidney disease detection technology had saved thousands of lives. Raj, who had left Neuroscience to launch a breakthrough educational platform. The Columbia student group that had grown into a thriving community of women in AI, each representing a ripple effect, an expanded possibility that my story had helped catalyze. The commencement ceremony was held in Killian Court, with thousands of graduates and their families gathered under a perfect blue sky. As I was introduced and walked to the podium, I felt a momentary surge of imposter syndrome. Who was I to address these brilliant young minds about to enter the world? But then I remembered my own graduation, sitting where they now sat, having no idea of the journey that awaited me. How I would be dismissed and underestimated, how I would doubt myself in the small hours of the morning, how I would build something others couldn't yet see, and how that creation would eventually transform, not just an industry but my understanding of what's possible. Graduates, I began. Conventional wisdom says I should tell you today about success, about achievement, about making your mark on the world. But I want to talk about something different, about the courage to see differently, and what becomes possible when you trust that vision. I shared the story of Neurasense's creation, not the sanitized, triumphant narrative of business media, but the messy, doubt-filled reality. The skepticism from former colleagues who couldn't understand why I would leave a prestigious position, the family members who dismissed my work as an internet job until it appeared on Bloomberg, the countless moments of uncertainty when I questioned whether I was seeing something real or merely deluding myself. The most valuable innovations begin as perspectives that experts dismiss, I told them. Not because experts are wrong about what is, but because their expertise often blinds them to what could be. They are masters of the existing paradigm, which makes it harder for them to envision a different one. I explained how breakthrough innovation requires a particular cognitive stance, the ability to identify gaps between established consensus and emerging reality, to distinguish between conventional wisdom and actual truth, to persist with a vision before external validation confirms its value. Your education has given you extraordinary tools, I continued. But the greatest gift is the capacity to question assumptions, to identify limitations in current thinking, to envision possibilities beyond established boundaries. That capacity, to see differently and to trust what you see, is what transforms. Industries solves seemingly intractable problems and expands what we collectively believe is possible. As I concluded my address, I shared what I had learned from the hundreds of innovators I had worked with through the Institute and fellowship programs over the past 5 years. The true measure of a breakthrough isn't its commercial success or media attention, though those may follow. It's the degree to which it expands our collective sense of what's possible, the permission it gives others to trust their own unique vision when it diverges from conventional thinking. Looking out at the sea of graduates, engineers, scientists, artists, entrepreneurs, I felt a profound sense of hope. Each represented a unique perspective, a potential source of insight that might transform how we understand and navigate the world. The future isn't determined by what currently exists, I told them in closing. It's created by what we can imagine and have the courage to pursue. Trust what you see, especially when others don't see it yet. That's how new possibilities emerge. As the ceremony concluded and I made my way through the crowd, a young woman approached me, determination evident in her stance. "Ms. Chen," she said, "I'm Amara Davis. I've been following your work with the Institute while developing my thesis on agricultural intelligence systems. Everyone says centralized AI is the future of farming, but I see something different. A distributed approach that empowers local knowledge and adapts to microclimate variations." I smiled, recognizing the pattern. Another visionary, another perspective that challenged conventional thinking, another possible breakthrough that might expand what we believed was possible. "Tell me more," I said, stepping aside from the crowd, to listen. As Amara described her vision, I thought about the chain reaction that occurs when one person's breakthrough inspires others to trust their unique perspective. From Neurasense to Zara's climate tech, to Lynn's medical innovation, to Amara's agricultural vision, each expanding the boundaries of perceived possibility, creating space for the next breakthrough. And that, I realized, was the true legacy of that Bloomberg headline 5 years ago. Not the personal wealth or recognition it had brought, but the ripple effects it had created, the permission it had given others to trust their vision when conventional wisdom said they were wrong. Later that evening, I received an email from one of the graduates who had attended the ceremony. "Your speech made me realize I've been seeking validation for an idea everyone tells me is impossible. Today, I decided to stop asking for permission and start building it anyway. Thank you for showing me that the most valuable innovations begin as perspectives others dismiss." I smiled as I read it, thinking of how many similar messages I had received over the years, each representing a moment when someone chose courage over conformity, vision over validation, possibility over limitation. The journey from internet job to Bloomberg headline had been just the beginning. The real story was what happened after, how one breakthrough inspired others, how each expanded what we collectively believed was possible, how the courage to see differently created ripples that continued to spread in ways I could never have imagined when I first sat in my Brooklyn apartment, coding the first version of Neurosense while my family dismissed my work. Success isn't measured in headlines or acquisitions or even individual breakthroughs. It's measured in the expanding universe of perceived possibility that each breakthrough creates, the continuous revelation that what we believe is possible represents only a fraction of what actually is. And that revelation begins with a simple but profound choice: to trust what you see, especially when others don't see it yet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.